A very warm welcome, everyone. My name is David Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore. Thank you for joining us for this, our second in a series of online trade seminars aimed to support UK companies with access to information on the market opportunities available. Today, in this seminar, we'll be looking at the maritime sector opportunities here in Singapore. With Singapore being such a huge important hub in Asia for logistics, maritime services, engineering, education, just to name a few, this seminar will provide a high-level helicopter view of the sector and the opportunities that present themselves for UK businesses. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping for today's session. Firstly, please do use the Q&A function to submit your questions to the speakers, and these will be addressed towards the end of the session. For those questions that we can't answer if time gets tight, we will certainly get back to you. So please do filter your questions through to the team. Finally, the seminar will be recorded today and it will be posted on the Chamber's website. So should you wish to revisit any points that are discussed today, the recording will be available along with the slides to help you further. I'm delighted to welcome three excellent speakers for you today. Firstly, Dr. Sanjay Kutan, Executive Director at the Singapore Maritime Institute. Toby Stevens, Partner at HFW, and Toby is also the lead of our British Chamber of Commerce Maritime Forum that sits within one of our core business committees on transport, logistics and supply chain. And finally, Paul North, the Director of Trade at the UK ASEAN Business Council. A very warm welcome to all three of you and thank you very much for your time today. Turning to today's agenda, the session will start off with a little bit about the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore and what the Chamber can do to support UK companies that are either already set up here in Singapore or are looking to set up in Singapore to support with growth both here and across the ASEAN region. We'll then hear a little bit about the Sea Transport Industry Transformational Map that's already in place, set to drive Singapore's vision to be a global maritime hub, providing you an opportunity to hear firsthand about the initiatives that are in place and some of the opportunities available. That will be followed by a presentation from a leading legal firm who are operating in this space, turning to a presentation on what ASEAN is more broadly and some further opportunities. So, a very warm welcome from the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. So that you don't hear my voice for a full 10 minutes, here is a very, very quick video summary of what the Chamber does.
So that was a very quick snapshot of what the chamber does. I'll just run through a couple of slides just to explain why we're actually putting this seminar on, and a little bit just delve into a bit more information about what we do. We do have around sort of 4,000 members here in Singapore. We were established in 1954, and really the chamber's goal is to support UK companies and those that are based in Singapore by providing a really powerful network of connected businesses to find opportunities for businesses to grow and talk to each other. We have a very broad sector demographic as part of our membership. Naturally, there are some sectors which are more prevalent within Singapore, such as financial services, but certainly with the marine and maritime space and Singapore being such an important transport and logistics hub, this is obviously a very, very important sector and why we're putting on this seminar this morning. We do have very, very good relations with the British High Commission in Singapore. We work extremely closely with the team there and specifically the Department of International Trade to support companies to explore Singapore and the broader ASEAN market, to set up companies and to look at how we can support with your company growth as well. So we really are plugged into the network here to support companies that are exploring this market. We have a series of business committees which make up our membership base and act as our voice of British business here in Singapore. The key one that's aligned to this topic and this discussion is our Transport, Logistics and Supply Chain Committee, which covers both, well, land, sea and air as topics. And I'm delighted on this call that we've got Toby Stevens, the lead for our Marine Forum under the Transport, Logistics and Supply Chain Committee. So there's a powerful group that's already set up with great expertise to allow companies to plug into the market here in Singapore. This is just an overall snapshot of the type of companies that we have as members. There are a range from the large oil majors to education providers to smaller shipping companies in here to financial services and business services. So a whole mix, a very, very diverse range of members that we have to support companies that are coming across and to quite easily help us to connect you to relevant businesses, like-minded businesses. And whilst we are the chamber here in Singapore, we are part of what's known as the BISIA network, the Britain in Southeast Asia network. And this is a really, really important forum because this is a way that we can connect companies that come into the chamber here in Singapore. If they are looking to set up a business, fantastic, but we can also handhold companies through the process of looking at opportunities in other parts of the ASEAN market as well. So we have a great representation and a very, very good relationship with the other chambers in the region to provide that support mechanism for UK companies that are exploring the ASEAN market as an opportunity to grow, to set up and to increase their customer base as well. So one of the things I would stress that is a really important part here is that the chamber can act as that conduit between other markets and support your entry into other areas as well. We also have a great link with the Singapore government. We're consistently engaging with the government ministries to support key agendas from the British and the international business community. Here is a picture of Minister Iswaran speaking at one of our business awards. But really the purpose is, whilst we've got the brilliant relationships that we have with the British government through the High Commission, and we also have very strong connections with the ministries and the stat boards in Singapore, enabling us to have a consistent narrative to support business and to ensure that ministries are aware of the challenges and the opportunities available to UK business. So where does that come into the trading piece and how does the chamber help? Well, just a bit of a snapshot of what Singapore looks like. It is the size, around about the size of Anglesey, so it's quite a small island specifically, but there are some really, really unique points around Singapore, mainly its geographic location and how much of a hub Singapore has become in terms of the broader ASEAN and the wider Asia Pacific market specifically. It does only have a population of 5.6 million people, but we are seeing as a chamber lots of companies that set their business in Singapore and export into other countries from here as a regional or a global hub. So it has become a very, very important place for companies to explore. English is the first taught language. It has a very, very well educated workforce here, and it's the second easiest country in the world to do business as well. So it has got some favourable stats in terms of support, the availability for companies to set up here in Singapore. The chamber itself has a very active trade services team supporting companies. Over the last 3 years, we've helped around about 1,000 businesses with inquiries on how to set up, on their customer acquisition. So we really do act as that support mechanism for UK companies that are looking at the market. And some of the key sectors that are covered here in Singapore are highlighted on the screen now. The ones in green are the ones where the Chamber has an active membership, which are driving good quality contacts, connections, content to share across the various markets. And as you can see third from bottom there, Marine is very much a part of that through our Transport, Logistics and Supply Chain Committee. So through our trade services team, we provide in-market support. Given that a lot of us are struggling with the COVID situation at the moment, a lot of people are working from home, we've seen a number of companies that have approached us to try and do some advisory work in the background for when businesses do start to open up, to do that sort of background research. So we do provide opportunities to share what's happening from a regulatory and a legislative perspective, what it's like to do business, but we also provide the opportunity to actually match businesses with other like-minded businesses and potential customers as well. We run a series of trade missions throughout the year, and those can be in groups, they can be by sector, they can be by geography, or they can be individual. So we do a lot of work to support that flow of trade and the export opportunities for UK companies. And if anybody does want to get in touch with our trade team, there is you can get in touch through trade@britcham.org.sg. We are very, very passionate about this. It's a very, very important part of what the Chamber does. And again, it's not just Singapore that we look at. We actually support the hand-holding and the growth of companies across the ASEAN region as well, which you'll hear a little bit about later from Paul from the UK ASEAN Business Council. So to make this really easy for companies, and I won't talk too much about this, but we have got an online portal that is available to support companies. There's a couple of online forms through this page, which allows companies to quickly explain what they're looking for, what advice, what support they require that can be picked up by the team. For smaller businesses, for startups, for those that are looking for access to capital and funding or R&D money, for example, we can help with that as well. So we help with a whole broad range of services to support British businesses. And that's where you can get to it from the website. It's available on the homepage, but there's a direct link, and we'll make sure that we do share these slides so that you've got access to all of this information as well. Finally, just a bit of a nugget really. Singapore is very, very good at telling us where it wants to go. They have a series of industry transformational maps which they have designed, which they've publicised, telling the world effectively where it's trying to progress to, where it wants to get to, what it's investing in, what skills it's developing, and how it's maintaining its competitive position across the world. Specifically, the marine and offshore piece is covered by the Economic Development Board, and the sea transport piece is covered by the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. And I know that Dr. Sanjay Kutan will talk a little bit about that industry transformational map as well, but it's a bit of a nugget of information that you can find a lot of information around where Singapore is trying to get to in various sectors. So I would encourage you to look at the MTI website and the Economic Development Board website and the Chamber website as well. Finally, when things do start to open up after this unprecedented time, we do have a relationship with British Airways to support those that do want to make trade missions, that do want to come across, that have got meetings set up that the Chamber helps to facilitate. So we do provide some options in terms of some discounted flights, which is to help companies to reduce their cost base. We also have some relationships with a number of hotels here as well, so that the cost of your trip to Singapore, if you are looking to export, you are looking to expand across the region, we can try and help you with that as well. And one other, just very finally, before I hand over to the first speaker, Do keep updated. We have got a new podcast channel. It has got some brilliant content around some of the opportunities in other parts of the market as well. So we have got a BCC network series which highlights some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, what it's like to do business in countries like Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, for example. So I would encourage you to keep up to date. You can keep up to date from afar, and we'll keep providing that information for you going forwards. So we look forward to helping you on your journey, hopefully. I hope you find this seminar of interest and support and aid. It's also great, I must mention, to see a number of friendly names that have turned up onto the attendee list as well from my previous life in the marine and maritime space. So a very warm welcome to all of you. And without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Sanjay Kutan, the Executive Director of the Singapore Maritime Institute here in Singapore, who does a lot of work with the Maritime and Port Authority and a hugely influential figure here. Really good to welcome Dr. Sanjay, and I will hand over to you now so you can start your presentation.
Good morning and good evening to all those near and far away. Thank you for that, David. I'm just going to pop up my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Yes, I think as David kind of mentioned towards the end, yeah, I heard a voice talking to me, sorry. That we try to actually lay out the direction we want to move towards, to not only for the international community, but also for the local community. And the roadmap was particularly important in the research roadmap is particularly important because it will articulate the desire of various organizations in terms of how they see the future look like. And with regards to that, this document is actually a public document. So if you go to the Singapore Maritime Institute website, you should be able to download this document. It's about 40 pages. So I don't intend to go through the entire document, but I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the background and what are the tensions that we're trying to address as we see it going forward into the future. Just very quickly, the Singapore Maritime Institute is a public company limited by guarantee by the Maritime Port Authority. So we have 3 board members, and the MPA is one of the board members. I report to the chairman of the board, who's in the private sector, and he's Mr. Wong from Samcorp Marine. And the 3rd board member is actually Prof. Tan Ziwi from the Agency of Technology and Research, A*STAR. All right. So very quickly, this is the content of the presentation. Let's get into it. So essentially, there were 3 national initiatives before we got into this. Now, this is the second roadmap. We released a roadmap in 2013. And that covered both marine and offshore and the maritime sector. In the early days of the Singapore Maritime Institute, the SMI also covered the marine and offshore sector, and we kind of split that out in 2017. So prior to the release of the second roadmap, there were 3 initiatives. As David has already mentioned, the industry transformation map, but there was also an international panel that were brought together in Singapore, and they had this discussion around making Singapore an international marine center, and it's called IMC 2030. And that threw up quite a number of interesting strategies and action items. And also later on, there was another international panel, both international and local panel, on the development of the next generation port 2030. As you know, Singapore is, I think, currently the second largest container transshipment hub in the world. And last year we had a throughput of around 37 million TEUs. The new mega port that we are building is designed for 65 million TEUs. So you can see that the entire vision of the port is far more ambitious, and it's not just about building a bigger port. So it's not the same thing and then you just multiply it by 2. But we're taking, because it's really a green field, so it's really on reclaimed land. We're starting from scratch. So the opportunity then was to design in all the features that we wanted to see the next generation port, and that includes digitalization, automation, sustainable green initiatives. So it was really supposed to be the port of the future, and that's where a lot of effort is being plowed into to get to that point. So the ITM, as alluded, we had 3 strategies around connectivity and interlinkages. Of course, there's productivity enhancements, and really also around the future-ready maritime workforce. Now, out of the ITM, one of the pillars was around innovation. So in the innovation sector was really not about just being a buyer, but it was also to Singapore to be a creator as well, leveraging on the institutes of higher learnings that we had already invested considerably in Singapore. And also a lot of the institutes have partnerships with other universities around the world, and from a British-centric perspective, the University of Newcastle is quite established here in Singapore with its partnership with SIT, and that they developed the maritime program there. So it's really around deepening the research and development capabilities. We have a program called Pier 71 that is growing the maritime startup and technology enterprises. And it was also around making sure that we had an enabling environment. So this is the motivation around developing a stronger R&D narrative for the country. Now, in the IMC, as I said, it was really looking at making Singapore a global maritime hub. And in that sense, we had a couple of strategies, and if you look at them, it's, is deepening the maritime cluster. And Singapore at the moment has around 5,000 maritime related companies, and around, on the average, about 170,000 people in the sector. Strengthening interlinkages and networks across these communities, which really cover the entire value chain of serving the maritime sector, which means just not ship chandlers, but also from insurance, legal, and then bunkering and supplies and things like that. And also to have a multi-skilled maritime workforce. As you can tell now, and you read in the news, Singapore's high dependency on foreign workforce for a lot of this construction work is fairly significant. Going forward in the mega port, we will have a manpower constraint. And for example, to have a port which has 65 million TEUs, we will need, if we stick to the current methodology of having truck drivers, we would need 8,000 new truck drivers. And this is going to be a very, very challenging task. So therefore, automation and autonomous and remote control vehicles and AGVs are going to be very much the play in the landscape of the future. And Singapore is planning to have around 1,800 to 2,000 AGVs on the piers operating. Right. So at the end of the day, Singapore wants to maintain its position as a global maritime thought leader and also a standard bearer. And when we look at the port, and I think this is where we really start to think through what do we need to do to make this happen. Now, Singapore is already small in terms of its land mass. It's about 700 square kilometers, and in terms of amount of sea water, is also around 700 square kilometers. But in terms of port waters, it's actually down to 100 square kilometers, which isn't very much when you have we have 1,000 ships a day in Anchorage, and one ship either coming in or leaving every 2 to 3 minutes. So that's a lot of vessels in a very tight space. So therefore, managing the space and also managing the security and safety becomes key strategies in the next generation port. And obviously, with technology, we can actually enhance the port users' experience, right from productivity and efficiencies in processes, and accessibility to services as well, and improve sustainability and environment. Well, some may say this is it's put there because it's the right optics, but in reality, a lot of the work around sustainability and environmental protection has been and is ongoing by the engineers. The chief sustainability officer is also the lead engineering manager for the entire port development. So he has to balance both KPIs, and he owns both KPIs. So as I said, we refreshed this in 2013, and what happened was when MPA sat down and thought about all these 3 different initiatives, they framed it into a 5 strategic thrusts. Right, one was Trust 1, where we look at efficient ports. Trust 2 is really around strategic sea space management. Trust 3 is around smart fleet operations and autonomous vessels. So these were the 3 vertical pillars, and of the obvious horizontals then was Trust 4 around safety and security, and Trust 5 on sustainable maritime environment energy. So the roadmap kind of hangs on this framework. So you will see it divided into these 5 segments, and then the articulation of the various capabilities that we want to see between now and 2030 developed. So if you look at Thrust 1, what is the scope of work that we see that we would have to develop? And it's really around port planning and optimization, terminal operations, and port services. Thrust 2, next generation traffic management, as I said, with the number of vessels, and the future is we're gonna have larger vessels. So the safety in the port area is actually very critical. Ship-shore communications are becoming more and more an issue because of dead zones, because of these large vessels, and also the need for faster communication to ensure that the instructions are passed on properly, and includes sea space management there as well. Our anchorage is still on the traditional anchorage where you have a single mooring point, but in the future we are looking at floating structures so that we can actually optimize and reduce in fact, increase the space productivity by more than 50%. In Thrust 3, we already started moving ahead in development around autonomous surface ships. There's interagency committee around the development of autonomous surface ships, which means that all segments of the government which would have to either endorse, approve, or have a stake in the deployment of such vessels are part of a committee with a single goal. In Thrust 4, as I said, we have both security and safety, and also with the decarbonization mandates from IMO, Singapore has to start thinking of how how it plays its role in both the sourcing and delivery of new fuels and ensuring that the marine environment is always protected. So what are the drivers? There are four external drivers: so socioeconomic and geopolitical changes, tech advancements, safety and security threats, and of course resource constraints. I'll just very quickly kind of blow these out a bit more. So as you know, we have industrial cyclical changes that's going on. COVID-19 is another example of that. And also, I think in the region, ASEAN ports are also developing. So where Singapore had a larger advantage in the past, that gap is closing. So for Singapore to remain relevant, it has to keep reimagining itself and keep pushing the boundaries on performance. And the other thing is also the possibilities of alternate trade routes. This was really driven by considerations around the Arctic. And I said again, port and international marine center competition. The other thing was also there are fewer mega transshipment hubs. So there was an opportunity to stake a flag in the ground and say, okay, if they're going to be a few, then we want to be one of the few, and to create that scale that will cut the cost of moving goods around. There's obviously now this shift of production and consumption basis. This is a constant change that's going on, and I think COVID-19 has shown that there's a lot of movement and discussion about movement of production capacity between China and to India. On tech advances, we have the non-traditional players transforming the maritime industry, for example, blockchain and Alibabas and things like that. Integrated services, new business models, autonomous systems, autonomous vessels is gaining momentum. If those of you who are tracking this, there's a lot of work going on in Europe at the moment on this in this sector, and also in Korea. And also, of course, the electric merchant ships or near sea shipping. This has taken off more in Europe, and I think in Southeast Asia is emerging. In fact, Singapore, Honglam Marine has 10 diesel electric vessels has been operating for the last 6 to 8 years. So this is becoming more of a reality, and we need to understand what it takes to service these kind of vessels. Cyber and terror threats, as you know, the carbon tax enforcement. Singapore and Southeast Asia announced its carbon tax. It's debatable whether it's high enough, but you know, Singapore, when you open the door, you're not going to close it. So it's a question of time or of increasing the tax value depending on the economic forces that's happening. The IMO is constantly dishing out new regulations. We just went through the first major one this year, which was the IMO 2020 and low sulfur. And 2030 and 2050 targets have been set. So the question is, how does Singapore play its role to ensure that that is complied with? The change in future fuel mix is a big challenge for any port that is involved in bunkering. Singapore accounts for almost 50% of global bunkering, but it's been always a hydrocarbon fuel. Going forward, what kind of infrastructure do we build for what kind of fuel to service what percentage of vessels that's coming to call at the port becomes a major decision, because once the infrastructure is put in place, it's hard to switch them around. For example, do we make a bet on hydrogen or liquid ammonia or methanol? We already made a bet on LNG, or even biodiesel. So these are things that we need to think about. And of course, the greenhouse reduction targets. Resource constraints, Singapore's okay. First, we have a growth rate of 1.01, so we're not even replacing ourselves. There's competition for talent. It's a vibrant economy, so a lot of people tend to head for the finance sector because that's where the big bucks are. And of course, I talked about the sea land space constraint on 700 square kilometers, and we have generally an older population because of the low birth rates. So these are actually the key drivers that that occupy the Singapore psyche in terms of trying to decide how do we prepare Singapore for a more sustainable future. So what we realized that if we're going to shift the needle on our transformational efforts, what are the industry capabilities we need to build? One of obviously is digitalization, and you find some of this quite obvious. Planning and optimization, autonomous operations, maritime safety, port security, maritime cybersecurity, maritime energy efficiency, and marine environment management. What does this do really is for the 5,000 companies in Singapore and the IHLs, now they realize that at least from the agency standpoint, we've actually planted 8 flags that we really want to pursue. So there are areas that we have decided not to, but we have said that these are the 8 areas that we really need to develop capabilities in. And this is also important for our young generation as they think of careers. They know that that there is a focus and drive to in these capability areas as well. We identified 8 key challenges, and this is important if you're a supplier of products and services. But a lot of this has taken a more R&D feel. We just about to award a project to look at novel coning and deconing of containers, and you can imagine why this is important. If you're constrained by coning and deconing, when you move from 35 to 65 million TEUs, this becomes a bottleneck, especially for your workers. Empty container repositioning is a nightmare to manage, and we're still thinking whether quantum technology can help solve that. Container scanning and checking on security. By the sheer volume, you can imagine that this can create bottlenecks. Also on container lashing and unlocking is another area that needs to be debottlenecked if we want to get to that kind of scale. Automated ship-to-ship bunkering processes. We depend a lot on seafarers between the bunker crafts, and this can be both dangerous and also in the future we may not have them. So we are looking at this as well. Advanced vessel berthing and mooring is also another area where it's still very manpower driven, and we need to find automation solutions. On-site testing of fuel quality is becoming more and more important because of the new bunker rules on the low sulfur does create a lot of compatibility issues. So to kind of find out way ahead of the curve is going to be very, very important instead of waiting for 7 days for the test to come true. And of course, like Industry 4.0, predictive and condition-based maintenance and management of equipment and asset is still very much up there. And this is still very much an area of development for services. And there are a lot of startups that have come up with different solutions that are being reviewed at this juncture. These are just capabilities that we believe that our maritime sector will need to kind of develop around in terms of individual capabilities and technical capabilities. This list is available in the report. So at the end of the day, this for research, we really are driving towards outcomes. We at least at SMI's level, we focus on TRL levels, technology readiness levels of 4 to 8 or 4 to 9, and we leave the TRL levels 1 to 3 to the Ministry of Education to do basic and fundamental research. So therefore, a lot of the projects that we are approving, we are trying to define the impacts that they would deliver in our journey towards in the milestones that have been identified on the roadmap. And this just gives you a sense of how we're thinking about what that impact is in terms of time, in terms of people management, in terms of the environment, and also in terms of cost. And I think we use this as a guidepost to question and sharpen the research proposals that come out from the universities. And 80% of our research has been in partnership with industry. So industry has always been playing a huge role in the research partnership with the IHLs. And we hope to see this grow to almost 100% in the future, because the industry brings in the relevance of the research work in terms of delivering the impact. So we've launched the transformation program. It's actually moving quite well. We've had a number of projects being approved. We I think it was October last year, we launched the opening of the 4th Center of Excellence. SMI has now 4 centers of excellence that it's funding. The 4th one was around autonomous vessels and remote operated vessels. And this is really to drive the capabilities and an understanding on the development of such vessels. You must remember this, although Singapore's shipbuilding industry is really small, the understanding of how these vessels operate is critical in the way the port operates. So that's where the link is, essentially. Right. So we are quite well funded as from at least from SMI. We have about $60 million to burn over the next couple of years. We just got an approval for $50 million last year for another program, and there is another $50 million in industry collaborative R&D as well, which the MPA manages. And on the next tranche of 2025, the government is now looking at RIE 2025 and looking at how we'll budget those amounts as well for all sectors, just not maritime. Right, so we hope we're putting in our bids for what we think we want to fund to 2030 through that funding capability. So this gives you the email to contact us if you need anything, and be happy to answer any question either from this email or on this panel. And do visit us on our website to get a sense of the roadmap that we have actually developed and published. Thank you very much.
Sanjay, thank you very, very much indeed for that very insightful presentation. A great overview of the activities that are happening in Singapore and the plans that are going ahead. If I could just ask you to share your screen with Toby, that would be great. Just in the meantime, we've started to see some questions come through for the panel, so please do continue to add them into the question box on your screen. That would be really helpful, and we'll take all questions at the end.
Okay, I've passed it to Toby. Toby, have you got it? Okay, we can't hear you, Toby, but.
Now I'm here. Thank you very much, Sanjay. Yes, I've now got here, and somebody has kindly unmuted me. I'm sure that they will mute me again when they've had enough of me. I thought I would come online and just let everyone see what I look like. But I'm going to go off again simply because the Wi-Fi network here is not so good, and I'd rather you saw the slides. So don't worry, I'm not running off, but I shall be here in the background. Just want to check that everyone can see my slides. So thank you very much for the introduction and David's kind words earlier. It's a privilege to serve on the Maritime subcommittee, and looking forward to working with them going forward. But starting off, I'm trying to say standing strong, looking ahead in Singapore, a note of optimism. But I think trying to draw together some of the threads that we've seen from Sanjay's presentation, and indeed David's overview beforehand. What I'd like to do is, I think, tackle the elephant in the room head on, and looking very much at the COVID-19 situation, where we see it going, what the short-term impacts are going to be, and those are clustered in orange around the COVID-19. So particularly in the maritime space, these are particularly ones that we've seen as a law firm looking at advising on. Logistics, supply chain issues, of course, port terminal yard closures, quarantine of crews and vessels, etc. Issues tendering, receiving documents, global fall in demand, and demurrage issues are very sort of immediate term pressures people are asking and seeking advice. And then looking at more medium term issues, force majeure, wrongful termination events and frustration, insurance and business interruption claims. We're already starting to see these coming through. Lawful voyage orders, safe port warranty questions, crew employment and sufficiency, and epidemics and contagious disease clauses all coming through. We're starting to see those now. And then, of course, we've got the longer term concerns, impact on the cruise industry, and of course passenger claims. We're already perfectly aware that those are going to be a big issue, as is insolvency, and looking at your own and counterparty risks, future-proofing contracts, and risk management. So again, just the first seeds of those coming through, what people are dealing with. And the reason to put that into context, these are global issues, of course, in the maritime sector, but everything is very much more concentrated in Singapore. But the good news, and hopefully the presentation will show you that Singapore in particular, but the Southeast Asia or ASEAN region is looking to bounce back that much quicker than other more established markets. So if I can move on my slides. No, too far. I do apologise. It would help if I could drive the machine. Sorry, bear with me while we have some technical issues. No, not sure how I can deal with that for a moment.
Hi Toby, if you just click on your presentation that you're showing, it should then, yeah, and then you can use your arrow keys.
That is very helpful. Thank you very much, David, for the technical incompetence that I've got. Right, okay, on to the next one. So the new normal, we're already seeing the impact of the US-China trade war prior to the COVID-19 issue. Of course, has amplified everything. It's causing a major shift in global trade. So there is the deterioration of the multilateral trading system. The world is moving to bilateral pacts as it once did before. So there are severe supply chain stresses, particularly for food and medical supplies. Those again have been amplified by COVID-19. IMF World Economic Output has been revised to a 3% contraction in world output for 2020. And the World Bank again has changed its growth status for China to grow from 6.1% down to between 0.1 and 2.3% sorry, that should be 2020. And then developing regions growth estimated at 0.5 to 2.1% versus a rather optimistic view in 2019, or more optimistic view. So if you look at the projections, though, in the 2020 column, the table I appreciate is a little bit small, but you can see it's an unhappy picture. However, if you look at the 2021 column, what you'll see is actually in the revised outlooks as of last month, the projections seem to be bouncing back quite well, actually. So we'll see how those go. But the thought is it's not going to be a great year, but hopefully 2021 is going to look a lot better. So in particular, looking at the supply chain disruption, we know there's going to be a dramatic impact, particularly on the China trade. Tourism, we know there's huge spend is going to be impacted, and the supply chain in particular is under pressure. There's going to be restructuring of that supply chain. That seems to be inevitable. And how are companies going to deal with this? Well, manpower, cash flow, and automation seem to be the key themes there, in a way to improve efficiencies, restructure the whole of the business, and be able for supply chains to get back on track. The impact here in Singapore of COVID-19 is markedly more severe than SARS. I wasn't living here during the SARS epidemic, but the legislation that has been brought about certainly exceeds that of SARS. And I'm told by everybody who was here that the impact is clearly more severe. The prediction is that it's going to have a greater economic impact. It's complicated because of the globalization in the supply chain, and there is a huge degree of government intervention, both in here within Singapore and, of course, internationally in the various markets. So those all have an impact on the key stages of the supply chain. But production is likely to recover faster than demand. I think the economists all say that there is going to be a nervousness about the economy, and so people will be cautious when the economy starts to recover. The buying power will be greatly reduced. People are going to be looking at reducing operational costs, and that's going to be I think a very key focus, particularly when you look at in the shipping industry. If you look at the container market, for example, there was already overcapacity in the market. So the growth of smart ports, I'm not really going to look at, because of course Sanjay has been through that incredibly thoroughly. But just to again touch upon that from my perspective, there is a productive, flexible workforce with the automated terminals. 2 has to be fully automated in time, and of course a reduction in the operational cost. As Sanjay says, always looking for those efficiencies. The government doing their best to stay relevant, stay competitive in the face of competition within the region. So moving on to the tanker market, and apologies for a picture of the container ship there. I'm not sure that we have licensed pictures of tankers, it seems, on our books, but the short-term outlook is positive because of floating storage has offset the shrinking seaborne trade and the continued fleet growth, of course. So dirty tank capacity used as floating storage late last month included 102 VLCCs, which has grown considerably. And the product tanker capacity engaged in storage has risen from 1.1 million tons to 10.5, so almost a tenfold increase. But the medium-term pressure, we think, from the lower oil trade, winding down of oil inventories from traders and stocks, banks, and others, is going to put pressure on that in the sort of 6 to 12 month bracket. But we'll see what happens there. It is a situation that is developing daily, as I'm sure you all know. The impact on the oil price, as with everything else at the moment, has been completely unprecedented. But there is quite a lot of good news for Singapore with the low bunker prices, because Singapore is the largest bunkering hub in the world. So total sales of bunkers increased to 4.32 million tons in March of last year. So it's up a little bit. Demand is anticipated to hold up throughout April and May as the tankers arrive and Capesize move towards the Atlantic, with more vessels bunkering in Singapore instead of China. So if you look at the summary of the port performance, vessels arriving, these are millions of gross tons. The size of the vessels has gone up quite dramatically, almost 10% increase. The number of vessels has gone down, but the size has obviously gone up. Container throughput is up, cargo throughput is up, bunker sales is up. So what we've seen actually through a global downturn, pretty much in the from the port point of view, has been an uptick for the time being. So where does that leave Singapore? Well, perhaps not. I'm not trying to go back over David's presentation, but the World Economic Forum ranked Singapore as the most open and competitive economy in the world. The World Bank ranked it as the second most pro-business regime. As David said, economically and politically it's very stable. There's no foreign debt. There's high government revenue with a consistently positive surplus. So all of that helps create a very positive pro-business jurisdiction. And we've seen that the imports and exports for its size punches very much above its weight. Consequently, it is a very good place, a very attractive place for direct investment from abroad. 82 billion in 2018, I found. That's even more concentrated when you're looking at the maritime world, and there's a publication, if anyone has seen it, Leading Maritime Capitals report. In 2019, Singapore was ranked first in shipping, ports and logistics due to its attractiveness and competitiveness, and number 2 for ease of doing business. As I said, it's the home to the second largest managed fleet in the world, and the third largest owned fleet in the world, which is incredible. Very, very impressive from where it was 5 or 10 years ago. And all of that creates a huge number of opportunities because the main consumer of products, tech innovations, tertiary services as they may be, are right here on the doorstep. And that's not going to change because the government, as Sanjay said, is investing on keeping its place and actually getting to number 1 in the world. Improving its position. And Sanjay talked a bit about the sea transport industry transformation map. I'm not going to go over that, but what you will see is they are seeking growth of 4.5 billion Singapore dollars by 2025 and creating 5,000 jobs, which is an impressive growth strategy. And the MPA strategic long-term plans to develop the next generation port and strengthen its international maritime centre. I mean, it is incredibly impressive, as Sanjay was saying. The Maritime Cluster Fund, again, apologies if I'm going over a little bit of what Sanjay had said, but the manpower, business development, productivity improvements I've set out there as being what the Cluster Fund is looking to support, and in particular, enhancing training for companies and individuals, co-funding qualifying companies, expanding into new lines of maritime functions in Singapore and internationally, and elevating the productivity using enhanced processes and workflow, or by developing and adopting tech solutions. And that's where the nub of this is. There are so many opportunities, there's funding available. It's a great platform, really. And moving on to a bit more of my area in the legal centre, and just to give you this as an example, really, of the professional services that have grown in the hub, and where, again, there are opportunities around the owners, the traders, charterers. There of course is a key desire on the part of the government to create the infrastructure, all of the at all levels, the support levels, and key amongst those is developing a legal dispute resolution centre, so that not just the trade is passing through Singapore, but also there is a neutral system. And it's very much built on English law principles, so it's much easier for someone like me to operate here. So the Singapore International Arbitration Centre has developed, is very well established now. They've overcome the issues on virtual proceedings and hearings that we saw at the very outset of the COVID issues, and like everything in Singapore, there is a very easy solution. There's support for finding solutions. There are ways around it. The administrative bodies are very, very nimble in the way that they can operate. And to give you an example, I sit on the Singapore Shipowners Association Legal and Insurance Committee, and the solutions there when it was considered that there was a risk, there was a need for a war risk mutual. One was developed very quickly. There are protective measures that put in place for Singapore companies, and legislation pushed through in a matter of months that you would never see in the UK or frankly anywhere else in the world. Here to support and to protect businesses in the maritime sector. So it's impressive, it's light-footed and agile as a result of that. And you also saw perhaps that the government was very quick to bring in COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act, which helped businesses here and gave temporary relief from liability caused by companies' inability to perform contracts like loans, for example, for small to medium-sized enterprises, hire purchase agreements, commercial vehicles and plant, etc., and tourism, carriage of passengers, entertainment industry, etc., etc. It also prevented people and companies from issuing proceedings for certain claims in the next 6 to 12 months, so everyone got a bit of breathing space. And it limited certain bankruptcy and insolvency proceedings, again, trying to give respite to get companies back on their feet and allow them to trade their way out of difficulties. Also, minor more minor procedural issues like the requirement to hold company meetings in person. Now you could hold those remotely, things like that. So there are a whole suite of measures there, and it is impressive to see the way that the government and legislature works. Just as a final element, and really to tie back to the former presentation, but the Maritime Port Authority and the Enterprise Singapore have been investing $60 million jointly with the private sector to develop the maritime tech. Singapore already uses a number of digital solutions, which makes life easier, certainly for us as lawyers, and enhances operational efficiency, so electronic certificates for vessels. They're also looking at co-developing e-bills of lading, for example, and other trade and maritime documentation. And again, you've got the investment at TUAS. So that was very much a rattle through, but really to draw it all together, it's a great place for doing business. There is a concentrated desire to push Singapore as the number one maritime nation, not just through tech, but also through the rest of the service industry and the support for the shipping industry here, and project itself globally. And just being here for a relatively short period of time, looking at that and the way that it conducts the business and it creates that business-friendly atmosphere is really impressive. So on that note, assuming I can actually hand over if I've got the technical now, so I'm going to try it and pass over to Paul.
Thank you, Toby. That was a very interesting update in terms of what it's like to do business here and some of the nuances as well. Just in the for the benefit of time, please do enter your questions into the question box on your screen. We've had a couple that have come through, which I'll just answer very quickly before I hand over to Paul. One of them was around the maritime sector is a very small part of the chamber. Is that changing? Yes, that is changing. The chamber has been sort of transitioning into a place where we work across all sectors. So one of the key areas that we're looking to deliver are sector-specific pieces of content like this. Okay, this one's very, very high level just to get things going, and we will drill down into sort of key elements of the sector to provide opportunities for UK companies. So the whole purpose of setting up a maritime committee under our transport, logistics and supply chain business group is to help drive that activity going forwards. So Final presentation. Thank you very much, Paul, from the UK ASEAN Business Council. Obviously, with Singapore being an important hub within the ASEAN region, it's great to have you on board just to sort of talk about the opportunities and the community across the Southeast Asian nations. Over to you, Paul.
Lovely, thank you, David, and thanks very much for giving us UK ASEAN Business Council the opportunity to present today. And thank you very much, Sanjay and Toby, for that informative and great insight into the marine industry and how you also see not just Singapore, but the region coming out of the COVID situation. I'm probably going to do the same as Toby did and switch off the camera. Just because I want to ensure that we've got good clarity to everybody who is listening. So yeah, once again, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Paul North. I'm the Director of Trade at the UK ASEAN Business Council. And I just wanted to give you sort of an overview of ASEAN and actually what we do as a business council and how we are helping UK exporters into the ASEAN marketplace. So what is ASEAN? It's the Association of Southeast Nations. It was established back in 1967 to really accelerate cultural development, economic growth and social progress throughout the region. And since 1967, it's grown to include those 10 countries that you see up on the slide there: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. They are all very diverse markets economically, culturally and politically, from the high-tech market of Singapore that we've heard a lot about today to the recently opened up market of Myanmar, a country that has nothing and needs everything. ASEAN is strategically placed as a geographical hub between China and India, has this young dynamic consumer market with a population of over 630 million, with just an average age of around 26. It is similar in part to other single markets, where you see slow and steady integration of economies, but ASEAN is so much different in the way that it has no common currency and it has no free movement of people. To give you an indication of the spend in the ASEAN markets, there's around 45 billion a year being spent on infrastructure projects across the region, and that's expected to continue. And along with infrastructure projects, of course, that brings on the back of that huge opportunities across other sectors. So it's where the growth is, and this is what I was saying 3 months ago. And that whole situation, of course, is changed due to the unprecedented situation we find the world in at this moment in time. And ASEAN economy has been strong, but as we have seen across the world, economies have been and are declining and even going into negative figures there. However, as Toby mentioned in his presentation, the analysts, the economists, and I've seen a great presentation from IMF, are predicting that because ASEAN's economy is very, very strong at this moment in time, that the region will bounce back very, very quickly. It's predicted it will be one of the first regions to really come back strong. And they are expecting, again, sort of high growth in this region, with predictions, for instance, for Malaysia of 9% and the Philippines of 7%. So, I mean, there is massive investment in the infrastructure and a lot of aid coming into the region. And long-term ASEAN growth will continue to be shaped by various policies, economic policies, regional trade policies, investment incentives, and infrastructure financing capacities and capabilities once we are over this unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in at this moment in time due to COVID. So this is just a snapshot of some of the sector opportunities that are available across the region. And David mentioned in his presentation that there were some key sectors in Singapore This is much the same across many of the other markets where we see what we call high value opportunities, and these are generally across the healthcare, the education, construction, infrastructure, and tech sectors. But here we are, we have 26 sectors here where there are and have been some active export opportunities. And I've underlined a few there because when this snapshot was done, I think 3 months ago now, there was 5 sectors that stood out from all the 120 export opportunities that were available across the region at that time. So where do we fit in as the UK ASEAN Business Council? So we are the leading UK-based organisation promoting trade and investment between the UK and ASEAN's dynamic markets. We were created several years ago out of the then UK Trade and Investment, which is now the Department for International Trade. The strategy then Britain Open for Business. But for many, many years we have been a private standalone business council, helping companies of all sizes and across all sectors build new contacts, provide them with market insights, and generally raise the awareness of the vast commercial opportunities, which is undoubtedly one of the most exciting, vibrant, and fastest growing regions in the world. We also bring ASEAN to the UK through a sustained calendar of country briefings, targeted meetings, one-to-one clinics, and promotional events. Of course, and events like we are doing here, webinars. And since our lockdown, of course, we have still continued to do a lot of virtual events, and we have a full calendar going forward on various sector and country opportunities right the way through to around July at this moment in time. But in addition, we do signpost practical advice and guidance on how to do business in ASEAN and can provide access to a considerable network of useful contacts. So I just want to, next couple of slides, show you our sort of partners of the UK ASEAN Business Council, and we are working closely with UK and ASEAN governments and key partner organisations, including the British Chambers of Commerce. And David mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I will just fly over it on a later slide. We work with influential corporates, experienced MSMEs, market experts, and professional service providers, and we have created really an extensive UK ASEAN business network that links UK innovation and expertise with ASEAN commercial development. We also work extremely closely with our colleagues from the Department for International Trade and across other governmental bodies there, as well as trade associations and the Chambers of Commerce here in the UK. This is just some of the logos of our partners. The top part there is our corporate partners of the UK ASEAN Business Council. As you can see, these are quite large organisations here in the UK, but are also extremely large and influential within the region. We have our British Business Group, the Chambers, and also, as I mentioned, working across ASEAN governments. So I won't spend too much time on this because David has really covered it, but we do work with our in-country partners, which are the British Chambers of Commerce in ASEAN, collectively known as Britain in Southeast Asia, and these are our in-country partners who are delivering market entry services for UK companies looking to get into the marketplace. And David has mentioned some of those services, which include market intelligence and partner identification, for instance. I do really encourage you to visit our digital platform, ukabc.org.uk, where you'll find a huge amount of information there. We have a lot of publications on the website, which are all downloadable about doing business in the region. We have on there all our upcoming events. Of course, we're doing everything virtual at this moment in time, but also on that particular page is events which are happening or will be starting to reopen and happening in the region. And that will also be helpful when eventually we get that confidence back for companies to go into the region. They may want to organize their travel around a summit or an expo. And also on there, we have export opportunities, live export opportunities that you can register your interest in. So this is us. This is the team headed up by our Executive Director, Ross Hunter. Alan Lay, who is our Corporate Affairs Director, is based out in the region, which is good for us to have an ASEAN address. And for those that don't know where we are, we're down there in Millbank. That's just down from the Houses of Parliament there. We're on the 15th floor of Millbank Tower there. So that's myself, that's my contact information, and I'm more than happy to have a chat with anybody who is looking to get and start exporting into the region. Thank you very much. Back to you, David.
Paul, a huge thank you. And I think one of the takeaways here for businesses in the UK is that, through the UK ASEAN Business Council and the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, you have got a support network there to support you. So please do get in touch with Paul or myself where we can help. And I'd like to extend thanks to Dr. Sanjay Kutan and Toby as well for your very, very interesting presentation, setting the scene in terms of some of the opportunities here in Singapore. We'll just take a couple of questions. I appreciate we're sort of running slightly over, but there have been some questions that have come through. Sanjay, one for you. I think, in terms of the thrusts of the roadmap, there must be lots of opportunities for UK companies, and appreciating that you're firmly focused on Singapore's agenda and what it's trying to do. Can you highlight sort of any areas where you see there might be opportunity for collaboration? Are there any sort of areas that Singapore is particularly looking for help in?
Okay, that's not an easy question to answer. Let me try and answer it this way, and I hope it helps. As the roadmap has identified the ambition of the kind of capabilities we want the port, or we see autonomous vessels developing towards, there is a constant discussion about what do we create and what do we buy, because we don't have, I think one thing we are quite certain about doing is we don't want to reinvent wheels and just to claim that it was made in Singapore. So there is definitely a procurement opportunity in that regard. But like all things, if you don't know that product or services exist, it's very hard to decide whether you want it or not. So my sense of guidance would be this, is to look at the roadmap and say, hey, wait a minute, we actually have something that could get them across the line. And for us to be familiar with that solution space, and then we can see whether the operator of the port, for example, PSA, or even if it's a MPA or any other agency or any other organization would like to go into a procurement deal, then it becomes a business opportunity. Or, we have something, and you know what, if we just did a bit more research, could we leverage the research community in Singapore to get it across the line as well? So, these are kind of the opportunities that exist. And it really depends on the kind of products and services you have. So it's all articulated there. I mean, it ranges from digitalization to automation. These are all very important areas, robotics, and we constantly are looking for solutions. I hope that kind of helps. I don't know.
I think that really does, Sanjay, actually, and I think there's also a point here, because there was another question that came through around how are the Department of International Trade and the Chamber staying close to the activities that are happening in Singapore to present some of the opportunities where Singapore and the UK can collaborate. And I think one of the key takeaways from this is that we have got these relationships with the likes of Sanjay at SMI and the MPA, etc., and keeping abreast of that. And one of the things that I think Singapore is quite transparent about is that there is an online procurement system called GBiz, which does highlight some of the opportunities for UK companies as well.
Yeah.
I've got another one for you, Sanjay, I'm afraid, and I'm going to put you right on the spot because this is a COVID-related question, and
sure.
I can pepper some of the answer as well. But it was regarding APM later this year in terms of do we think it's going to go ahead at the end of September? Now, this is a bit of a moving feast in terms of the narrative that's coming from the Singapore government at the moment. But have you got any insights in terms of whether that's still going ahead? That's just Asia Pacific Maritime for those that couldn't get the answer.
So one is I'm not the organizer of APM. I was going to actually be a speaker at the APM. So at the moment, we haven't been told, because they did one shift already from April to October. We haven't been told whether there's going to be a second shift. But definitely for the Singapore International Maritime Week, that's moved to 2021. We're not going to even do 2020. But APM, I'm on tenterhooks as well as all of you who are wondering whether it's going to happen or not. Just have to wait for the APM organizers to tell us whether they're going ahead. I think the big decision will come on June 1st when the government gets to that June 1st milestone on where they want to go. And you already see that today there's already a loosening of the circuit breaker. June 1st is another important decision point. And I think if June 1st sees some more easing, there's a high chance that by October things could be back to normal, but I don't know. I'm not holding my breath for that.
No,
sorry.
Thank you. No, that's absolutely fine, and obviously we will work very closely and ensure that the trade associations in the UK are aware as soon as we know anything. But it feels like Singapore is starting to loosen up a little bit over the next couple of weeks, but very much keeping a watching brief on that. Toby, if I could just turn to you very quickly. One of the questions that's come through is just in terms of trends that you're seeing working with lots of marine businesses. Are there any sort of 2 or 3 sort of key takeaways that you could provide our listeners with, those that are tuning in, with sort of advice if they're looking at Singapore as an export market?
Hello. Sorry, David, someone had muted me. Key takeaways. I mean, I think it very much depends on what in particular your focus is, whether it's tech or professional services. It makes a big difference, I think. But I mean, I know you didn't ask me to give you a plug, but since we joined the chamber, it's been incredibly helpful, really, to bounce things off you and look to the support that the chamber can give. But really, it's like any business plan. I think spotting the opportunities, understanding the market, and what your product or service can add to the region, the target companies here, and what the competitive edge is. At the moment, I mean, particularly, we're finding that the sterling is weaker, of course, against the US and Singapore dollar. So actually, we are a lot more competitive compared to other trading nations. So there's a lot to be gained at the moment.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Conscious of time and that it's sort of gone 5:30 Singapore time. I think we'll end it there. I think one of the key takeaways for me is that, and this has come through some of the questions, is how do we sort of keep close to where the opportunities are? And I think to Sanjay's point, you know, if you don't know what there is, that's quite an important takeaway, I think. So I think we will work together closely with the UK maritime sector to start pulling together the UK proposition against the roadmap. I think could be a key piece of work. So we'll start to do that. So any input from those that are listening in, gratefully received. A huge thank you to Dr. Sanjay Kutan, Executive Director of the Singapore Maritime Institute, Toby Stevens, partner at HFW, and of course to Paul North, Director of Trade for the ASEAN, UK ASEAN Business Council, and specifically to the UK ASEAN Business Council for hosting us today on their platform. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that was of interest, and please, for those who do want to get in touch with the Chamber and any of those on the call, we will follow up following this seminar and ensure that you have the relevant contact details. So I'll leave you to finish your day for those that are in the UK, and thank you very, very much for tuning in and listening. Thank you.
You're welcome, David. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Have a great day.